The current New Dawn ANC leadership, led by President Cyril Ramaphosa, took power, we knew that the working class was going to be faced with right-wing neoliberal capitalist agenda, and as such, as Numsa, we rejected his presidency. Indeed, the working class has not been spared. Neoliberal policies that are attacking the hard-won gains of workers and the working class in general are being implemented. We as a country, we are victims of austerity measures enforced by the ANC-led government of Cyril Ramaphosa, which has imposed a slavery national minimum wage of 20 rand an hour, something not even PW Botha declared to do. This kind of attack being executed by a democratic government is such a huge setback. It has become clear that we are reverting back to a familiar backward belief that the South African racist capitalist economy can only thrive through the super exploitation of black and African labor. If this was not enough, the very same Cyril Ramaphosa has been championing a process to tamper with the constitutional right of workers to strike. Numsa has consistently warned workers and the working class of South Africa in general that the ANC has chosen the Western capitalist path of development, which is both dangerous and disastrous for our country. We told anybody who care to know that what used to be called the National Democratic Revolution was off track, a truth that led to Numsa to being expelled in Kusatu in 2014. The entire ANC leadership is to be blamed for Eskom collapse. Numsa has noticed a very cheap ploy propagated by the ANC, where the current leadership, in its response to the deep-seated rot corruption within the ANC and its government, present themselves as being holier than thou, targeting the failures of particular individual who became the scapegoat for much deeper rot. Much rejected this ruse with we reject this ruse with contempt it deserves. Pravin Gordhan and Ramaphosa are complicit in state capture. The entire ANC leadership, led by Cyril Ramaphosa, directly and collectively responsible for the mass of corruption and rot that is ravaging the country. They chose capitalism, which is a system of greed that is inherently corrupt, breeding all social ills in their rejection of socialism, which advances humanity. It is the ANC capitalist right-wing policies that have plunged our country, culminating in a very deep economic recession last year. This leadership of the ANC, led by the President Cyril Ramaphosa, has no revolutionary agenda to transform the structure of South African economy in the best interest of our people. In fact, their agenda is to privatize all our SOEs, and their primary target is Eskom. Ramaphosa, during SONA, announced that Eskom will be broken up into three parts: generation, transmission, and distribution. He also confirmed that non-core assets of the SOEs will be sold. This is no matter how consistently the ANC denies. It doesn't matter how the ANC denies. It is privatization of Eskom what they are doing. This week, the Minister of Public Enterprise confirmed the ANC turnaround strategy to unbundle Eskom, which he argues is to provide transparency to turnaround strategy to unbundle Eskom, which he argues is to provide transparency and an end to corruption. The ANC has also announced through its finance minister, Tito Mboweni, its resolve to privatize Eskom in his 2019 budget speech. To confirm that this is going to happen, he has firmly encouraged that government is not going to take over Eskom debt, and that the condition for any financial assistance from the state is reorganizing or restructuring of Eskom. The definition of unbundling is to split company or conglomerate into its constituent business, especially prior selling them off. Unbundling anywhere else in the world has been the launching pad for privatization. This unbundling, the effect of it, are far more detrimental than what it is anticipated. The effect include retrenchment, closures of business, creation of ghost of ghost town, especially in Mpumalanga, and tariff hikes far higher than what one can afford on poverty national minimum wage of 20 rand an hour. This is why Numsa reject the so-called unbundling of Eskom. They have disguised their intention for obvious reason. Any sober person with a vision for this country knows that Eskom, which is our state asset and energy supply, must continue to be in the hands of the state and the hands of the people. Our SOE cannot be given to private individual to make money out of this key national asset, because as a country, we need a sustainable and affordable electricity tariff in order to champion manufacturing and industrialization, above all, to electrify our communities. We already know that this is well-orchestrated agenda and not one that responds to today's crisis, but a chosen path set in motion some time ago. This is self-generated crisis and a mediated strategy to force the people of South Africa into believing that there is no other option but to break up and privatize Eskom to secure future energy supply. In the wake-up of the state's capitalist agenda, South Africa's economy, both formal and informally, are collapsing. The painful irony is that the very leadership who present themselves as fighting hard to undo the crisis faced in Eskom caused by corruption are those who are responsible for the open looting of our SOEs. Numsa reject Pravin Gordhan's assertion that Enel will be resolving the load shedding crisis when we know that Enel is the beneficiary of the IPP project. Eskom's self-generated crisis. Numsa has always maintained that there are four holes that are sinking Eskom. This so-called unbundling offers no solution to the Eskom crisis and does nothing to close the holes, as the truth is this is a self-generated crisis. Numsa has consistently stated the main causes of the crisis, namely IPPs, inflated coal cost, a bloated top executive structure, tender corruption and cost overruns, Medupi and Kusile power station, to which the Eskom board, Minister of Public Enterprise and Minister of Energy are yet to provide a response. The ANC government long-held view and desire to privatize Eskom, leading to poor investment in maintenance, expansion and innovation. The negotiated capitalist transition guaranteed that post-1994, South Africa would be a corruption-ridden society in the state economy and society. Capitalism is corruption. Against not accepting this background of issues, they instead decided to unbundle Eskom, which is in liquidity crisis. Their fake cover for privatization of Eskom through unbundling is there will be transparency on the finances of the three division: distribution, generation, and transmission. The second equal false argument is that unbundling will stop Eskom from being a monopoly. Numsa correctly, scientifically view it. There is no need to unbundle Eskom to know the cost implication of the different operation. The current cost centers of Eskom reflect the condition of NERSA, three licenses, transmission, generation, and distribution. Therefore, unbundling does not resolve the current crisis of Eskom that is losing its market sales. The DA and the ANC are working together to destroy Eskom through the ISMOBILE. Numsa is very clear that the real agenda behind this unbundling and its real mission is to steal from the people the heartbeat of Eskom, which is the independent system market operator through the passing of the ISMOBILE. Numsa is very clear that this ISMOBILE is notorious, and Numsa will do everything it takes to challenge its legality, because it is about taking away from Eskom transmission operations, the entire national grid, Eskom control center and the system operator, and generation asset, hydro stations, including peaking plants, which are necessary for the grid stability under the ownership of ISMO. This is a cheap tactic to veto and to undermine NERSA's discretionary role to regulate energy. The whole agenda championed by President Cyril Ramaphosa is to take away all checks and balances on energy and hand over power to government, and grant the Minister of Energy unfettered powers. The results are very simple. It will be to fast-track the privatization and therefore destruction of Eskom and promote penetration of privatization-owned renewables into our national grid. This will finally destroy Eskom. Numsa call on all progressive communities and all progressive political parties to oppose the new alliance of the ANC and the DA that will vote for the passing of ISMOBILE. If it succeeds, Eskom as an institution will be hollowed out, and through this ISMOBILE, government will be in a position to fast-track privatization of energy in our country and destroy the capacity and the role of the state on energy. The ANC is lying when it claims that Eskom is not being privatized. The other lie which must be exposed is the argument that government is not privatizing Eskom. What the ANC of Cyril Ramaphosa is busy with is wholesale privatization, which we reject. We also demand that the current ministerial determination on gas be scrapped and Eskom be given at least 70% of gas generation. The function has also been handed over to the IPPs. Their strategy to privatize is anchored on the first lie that Eskom power stations have reached the end of their lifespan, when in fact such a decision is consciously taken by them. As they taken a decision to decommission a power station, they replace such power stations with IPPs, which are owned by private sector. As we speak, between 8 to 10 coal power stations are targeted for decommissioning. We know of 12 generating units which have been decommissioned between Komati and Rena, Grootvlei and Camden. This is nothing less than privatization of our energy. We're showing you here a graph which is a demonstration of how privatization is basically being orchestrated in front of our eyes. As they decommission one power station, they immediately connect IPPs that are in the hands of the private sector. So that's a smart privatization that this government is basically implementing as we speak. This wholesale privatization is even worse than the state intention in 1998 white paper on energy to privatize Eskom. Its mission was to crowd in then private sector by allocating 30% of future generating capacity to the private sector, with Eskom retaining 70% of the future build. When such an intention was announced, as the labor movement in this country, contrary to Enoch Godongwana lies that we have agreed to privatization, we were prepared to take to the street. What the ANC of Cyril Ramaphosa has done now is to declare war against the working class in the manner in which they are privatizing Eskom. Numsa is calling for total national shutdown to defend Eskom. The Numsa NEC has decided to embark on a rolling mass action through a declaration of Section 77 in defense of Eskom. We shall be calling for unity of all workers across various sectors of the economy. Numsa, NUM, SAFTU, and COSATU, in our view, must take a joint campaign and take to the street to defend Eskom. The current liquidity crisis confronting Eskom is self-generated by the current government, as demonstrated by the following. Government went ahead and signed the IPPs, despite the fact that it had enough capacity when the actual demand in the economy was on a decline. They did this without NERSA calling for public hearings. This was the case in 2011, 2012, 2015, 2018 in terms of bid 1, bid 2, bid 3, and bid 4. It is important to remind everybody about the role of NERSA, that it is governed by the National Energy Regulator Act, which says that every decision it takes must be consistent with the Constitution and be in the public interest. When NERSA allowed Eskom to sign the IPPs without calling public hearings, they acted recklessly, and both the Eskom board and the Minister of Energy, as well as Phakamani Hadebe, acted against the constitution of the country, which they sought to uphold. The early warning of such reckless decisions were very evident and glaring as far back as 2015. Of the 8.2 billion generated revenue, 6.5 billion went to the IPPs. Such a decision militated against the interests of Eskom, and as such, Eskom equity was eroded and its profit were depleted. It is only an idiot who cannot see that the biggest beneficiaries of the IPPs are the banks and the owners of the IPPs, as they earned whooping profits at the back of exaggerated tariff structure with a lavish return of 17% on equity on bid 1 and 2. The other lie that is often made by the defenders of the IPP is that we should not make any issue about renewable program because its costs constitute a pass-through cost. They conveniently forget that all of Eskom costs are passed through and are carried and paid for by the consumers. Furthermore, 60% of South Africans earn less than 4,200 per month, and as a result, the costly IPPs constitute an attack on the majority of the South Africans who cannot afford electricity due to the high tariff. It is a pass-through which is punishing consumers. The costly IPPs are destroying the economy, formally and informally, jobs because of unaffordable tariffs. The very same public are paying for IPPs that are destroying their well-being. This unbundling of Eskom is about privatization, which does not address its key fundamental challenges, such as increasing interest payments, borrowing levels that are excessive, the operating costs, IPP and costs, and sales volume which are declining. These are subsequently having a disastrous effect on the cash flow from operating activities. The Minister of Energy is conflicted because of his family benefits from the costly IPPs. Whilst Numsa respects and notes the press conference which was called by Patrice Motsepe, the chairperson of African Rainbow Energy and Power, to deal with what is perceived to be a conflict of interest in the IPP space. A simple search will show that bid 4, which was signed by his brother-in-law and Energy Minister Jeff Radebe within 7 days of his appointment, is to the benefit of Arab, which is linked to Kangas and Pedekral projects, which are part of 27 IPP as listed on the Arab website, which is owned by Patrice Motsepe. This is why Numsa welcomed Motsepe's decision to explain the position that they are not conflicted and that the IPPs is in their position, in their assertion, from the state, but are not from the state, but from the private sector. Numsa gripe over and above the IPPs being bad news for Eskom and the consumers is that there was no fair procurement process to award these IPPs. Jeff Radebe, as the Minister of Energy, is clearly conflicted given his proximity to the President and Motsepe. One wonders why the President is insistent to keep him, or was his deployment a conscious one? We're just posing a question there. Numsa demands an independent investigation into IPP's procurement process. Numsa is demanding that in the interest of South Africa's public and in the interest of fairness for those who are conflicted or not conflicted, government must agree on the appointment of an independent commission in consultation with all stakeholders, labor, government, business, and civil society, to investigate the procurement process involved in the IPPs. They must further announce to the South African public who are the men and women who are the owners and beneficiaries of the IPPs. We want to emphasize that the question of unbundling is nothing but a strategy to mislead the nation. For instance, it is a lie that we can be convinced that Eskom, which is owned and controlled by public, can be defined as a monopoly. Secondly, that justification that if you unbundle Eskom, you will have financial transparency. It makes no sense because NERSA has access to the cost of transmission, generation, and distribution. Thirdly, this unbundling is nothing but privatization, which does nothing to deal with the immediate challenge of liquidity, which is the problem of Eskom. Numsa will resume the battle over IPPs in court. In 2018, Numsa teamed up with coal transporters for forum to oppose the reckless signing of Bid 4, and we've taken a decision to continue to take up this fight with them. We are approaching the court on the 18th and 19th of March. Numsa is also aware that those who have resolved to privatize Eskom through the scheme of unbundling will stop at nothing. Even if we secure victory against Jeff Gadebe's reckless, scandalous decision to unbundle Eskom, such an outcome will lead to the future of Eskom withdrawing their funds, of the investors withdrawing their funds, resulting in Eskom being handed over to BRPs. This will render Eskom insolvent, thereby legitimizing the selling of Eskom asset to the highest bidder. So we're saying there is a plot and a strategy here that if we succeed, for instance, to challenge these IPPs, they will basically file for insolvency so that they can have a BRP which will still continue in its rescue plan. It will ensure that Eskom is privatized. The appointment of ANEL is another state capture in progress. Last week, Public Enterprise Minister Pravin Gordhan appointed an Italian renewable energy firm, Enel Green Power, to investigate the problem of load shedding or rolling blackouts at Eskom. It is our firm view that the appointment of Enel is not to fix load shedding, but to conduct an assessment in order to evaluate the worth of asset with the aim of selling them. If the genuine intention was to fix load shedding, generation capacity, they would not be importing skills because already the engineers in Eskom are expert and have this capacity. This has been proven with the previous load shedding where Brian Molifo successfully utilized plus minus 3,000 engineers who contributed to Eskom being named #1 power utility in 2001. The fact that the minister sees nothing wrong with announcing Enel, which is a competitor to Eskom and owns 27 IPPs, explain the bias of government towards the costly IPPs. This seems to be a systematic trend from President who appointed a fake task team. Apparently could not see the conflict of interest by appointing Brian Diamonds, who is the CEO of Patrice Motsepe Arab, who immediately resigned because of the conflict of interest, and the appointment of General Manager of Actom, Saigura. This task team was constituted by soldiers of fortune for IPPs and Eskom suppliers, Boiler Serve contract supplier, Anglo Coal. All the people who were in it, basically they were conflicted. The likes of Dr. Groofstein and Anton Eberhard have made numerous submissions to NERSA calling for closure of coal power stations which have not even reached their lifespan. This is why we are not surprised at their recommendation to unbundle Eskom. Anton Eberhard has been at the forefront of implementation of the IPPs across the African continent in Namibia and is a former member of NERSA. The ANC government deliberately appointed technically incompetent people to run Eskom. And we think that this is not neutral. As a manufacturing union, we are resolute that the future of this country hinges upon Eskom providing affordable electricity tariff to champion manufacturing instead of the ANC government appointing technically competent executives and the board. They given us a clueless retired individuals such as Jan Obenhozer and others. The state has failed to appoint competent people into key positions, thus leading to the collapse of the institution called Eskom. Numsa is identifying a comedy of errors with the following appointments. Andrew Estingza, Group Executive for Generation. He has got a zero knowledge in generation and operation experience. Jan Obenoza, zero experience in generation and operation. Pagamani Hadeb, zero experience in energy sector experience. Jabu Mabuza, zero experience in energy sector experience. Eskom Board of Directors, only two out of eight board members with power utility experience. Sustainability Task Team skewed IPP bias and advocate of failed unbundling. In the ministerial task team led by Deputy President, who is clueless about energy, this task team consists of ministers of police, intelligence. These are similar events to what happened in Marikana. When we look at this task team, it reminded us of Marikana. The entire Eskom board has no generation experience, and the big question is, when the board meets with the minister, what exactly do they talk about? On what is to be done, there is a trend from both government and Eskom to plunge the country into load shedding and blackout to justify an accumulation strategy to benefit individual and white monopoly capital out of Eskom. Whilst at the same time, there is absolutely no agenda to grow Eskom sales as a successful business. For instance, we're very clear that the load shedding in December was self-generated to create a crisis so that consequences of that crisis can be used to extend contract of cost-plus mines and justify unbundling. Between 2008 and 2015, they have been receiving increases, these cost-plus mine, increases out of captive market of Eskom executive allowed them to receive 17% increase year on year when inflation was hovering around 74%. This is one hole which is sinking Eskom. The recent load shedding, which made President Cyril Ramaphosa to appear shocked and angry, interestingly, follows the day after the president announced the unceremonious unilateral unbundling of Eskom without any consultation. What is curious about the president's anger is that he uses this untimely load shedding to justify how important it is that Eskom must be unbundled. It is Numsa's honest view that both the load shedding in December, which led to the renewal of the excessive contracts for cost-plus mines, as well as the recent faked load shedding, were to justify unbundling of Eskom, which is privatization of Eskom. It reminds us of Naomi Chomsky, who said, following about privatization, that's the standard technique of privatization. Defund, make sure things don't work. Make sure things do not work. People get angry. You hand it over to private capital. Numsa is challenging a lie that has been deliberately peddled by those who want to reap huge profit from IPPs and privatization of energy in South Africa, that 8 to 10 power stations targeted for closure are as a result of them having reached their end of life. The challenge that confronts us today is that we do not have an Eskom board, which we have a board of IPPs whose decisions have consistently been against the interests of Eskom and consistently promote IPPs. Furthermore, the mission is to privatize Eskom. That's why Numsa is calling on all South Africans and progressive communities to take a stand and to defend Eskom. The SOE is a strategic asset which is at the center of transforming minerals, energy, and finance complex, which is the South African economy as we know it. The ANC government has failed to transform this crucial sector. We need Eskom in the hands of the state to focus on offering an affordable tariff and not on profit. On our SOE must serve the South African people to deliver sustainable, cheap electricity into the South African economy to drive manufacturing and industrialization to big, small and medium-sized companies and create quality jobs that are paying a living wage. And more importantly, to deliver affordable power to the homes of the working class, who are the majority of the people of South Africa. Numsa is not mincing its words. We know for a fact that the closure of this power station is going to lead to massive job losses. Studies done by CSIR pointed out that the condition of the IPPs and the closure of power station will wipe out not less than 100,000 jobs in terms of forward and backward linkages in the economy, of which the majority will be in Mpumalanga. The IPPs that were connected in 2016 were connected when we had enough capacity to generate a unit of electricity for 42 cents per kilowatt hour. The connection of IPPs cost Eskom an average of R2.22 per kilowatt hour against must-buy first principle from the IPPs, forcing Eskom to sell at a loss of about 83 cents. Over the 20-year period, the IPP's agreement will cost Eskom more than 1.2 trillion in a nominal rands, which is more than the nuclear deal, which Zuma was basically fired for or removed, or his intention of connecting into the grid. The nuclear was rejected. Jeff Radebe, within 7 days of his appointment, unilaterally against the will of workers and the country, went ahead and signed on another 27 IPP contracts in April 2018, which cost R2.22 per kilowatt hour, when Eskom can produce a unit under 50 cents, and therefore Eskom is selling at a loss of about 85 cents. For the 2017 financial year, the IPP expense was 21 billion, all bid window 1 to 4, and the connection of IPPs means that Eskom loss will grow to 100 billion by 2022, according to its own calculations. These are Eskom calculations. We note the intention by government to negotiate bid 1, 2, and 3. Our demand is simple. The IPP signed in April must be cancelled. And if IPP really are means to offer South Africa sustainable and competitive electricity tariff, those who sign them into the national grid would offer full disclosure of all possible options for energy mix. And in what way IPPs are the better choice in the best interest of the people of South Africa. If IPPs really are our best and only option, why would Eskom not own and control those IPPs to ensure that our energy supply remain in the hands of the state, as opposed to being at the mercy of the private interest? This begs the question that if Eskom is defined as the electricity supplier of choice by the Department of Energy, why does Jeff Radebe not see the need for Eskom to play a role in the IPP space? What is also shocking is that he simply went ahead and signed the IPPs, and the argument that is being made is that these IPPs were already approved in 2015. It is not uncommon for government to consider a decision if it is not in the best interest of the public. And this is an issue which must be urgently reconsidered, because it is clearly not in the best interest of the public at large. Jeff still went ahead and concluded the IPPs, even though there was no demand. And secondly, Jacob Zuma, among other things he was attacked for, was his intention to sign a nuclear deal with the Russians, which was going to cost 1 trillion. The argument used against him was that IRP had not been reviewed, but Jeff Radebe was not held to the same standard. Even former Eskom CEO Mashela Gogo refused to sign these IPPs as the CEO, as he believed that it would be reckless and detrimental to Eskom. What is worse is that at the time the IPP is being signed, Eskom had a reserve margin of 23%, which was 6% more than the required 17% in terms of running the national grid. The 23% exclude imports and imports and IPPs to the grid. If one looks at the NERSA figures, they were way higher than the above figures. For instance, this is what NERSA said about Eskom when they awarded the Eskom tariff increase in 2018 and 2019. Operating with a reserve margin in excess of 35% when considering only Eskom supply means that Eskom has large excess capacity. This is more than double the required reserve margin. A reserve margin of 13% is estimated by the European Network System Operator for electricity. To demonstrate the disparation of Honorable Jeff Radebe and his ignorance of separation of powers between NERSA, which is our country's only institution with absolute discretion to regulate energy, he had the guts to tell the South African public an extremely conflicting statement, which is not contradictory in terms of the role, which is so contradictory in terms of the role of NERSA. And we quote him below. He says the energy regulator NERSA is committed to working with the new leadership of Eskom to address the challenge facing Eskom and to ensure that this state-owned company becomes sustainable for the benefit of South Africa, its people and the economy. Concrete steps will be taken during consideration by NERSA of Eskom new MYPD4 tariff application, which will include further allowances for additional costs that will arise out of renewable energy IPPs that are being signed today. This deal announced by Jeff is contrary to the role and regulator principles of NERSA, which are NERSA, the energy regulator should be neutral to all market players without favoring one or other group. In terms of its independence, the independence of the energy regulator from the regulated companies is prerequisite for any sound regulatory system. Independence from political influence is also desirable to ensure long-term stability of regulatory practice. Avoidance of regulatory capture by some customer groups is also necessary for successful regulation. Pravin Gordhan approved the cost overruns in Eskom, including Medupi and Kusile. Corrupt tenders have further driven Eskom into debt. The culprits who are responsible for the failure of looting of Kusile and Medupi must be investigated, and there must be no holy cows. This includes big catering contracts for both Medupi and Kusile involving prominent politicians. Numsa, contrary to Pravin Gordhan, hollow statement which serves to be economical about the truth, demands that the ANC government of President Cyril Ramaphosa, in consultation with unions and civil society, appoint an independent team of chartered accountants to conduct a due diligence on all daily plan failures to establish who has been the beneficiaries of these cost overruns. Eskom executives benefiting from coal and ash big contracts which did not follow proper commercial processes must also be investigated. Numsa is extremely irritated by what we regard as Pravin Gordhan opportunistic new-found Damascus moment when he has suddenly discovered that Medupi and Kusile are nothing but wreckage that cannot deliver to the national grid because of inferior specification plant design. What is shocking is that Pravin Gordhan, during the period of the construction of Medupi, was serving as the Minister of Finance and appointed the additional, was a Minister of Finance and approved the additional cost. Therefore, Numsa calls for President Cyril Ramaphosa to fire Pravin Gordhan from the cabinet for his negligence, because 90% of Eskom 490 billion debt can be attributed to the cost of Medupi and Kusile. Primary contractors at Medupi and Kusile who fail to implement designs should be pursued to pay compensation and damages for the failure of technical plans. Numsa rejects the retrenchments of workers, which is now open and now hidden in the face of the election. What Numsa is demanding here is honesty and a turnaround strategy for Eskom in the interest of the country. The economy and the people. As part of the way forward, we should not be misled as we fully understand the urgent and the critical nature of the liquidity challenge facing Eskom, whose debt is around 419 billion. We want to repeat that Eskom can be fixed and its liquidity can be sorted out. Moody's rating agencies cautioning against disastrous IPPs. Numsa hold a very dim view against the interference of rating agencies in the affairs of nation state. Still, when it comes to IPPs in 2016, Moody's saw the disastrous nature of IPPs, both for Eskom and for the South African economy. However, the ANC government chose to ignore them in the interests of the IPPs. This is what Moody's had to say in 2016. The group financial ratio remained very weak as a result of rising operation costs, primarily driven by high energy costs, ongoing growth in power purchase agreement with independent power producers, as well as the continuing roll out of its CAPEX program. This translated into a RCF debt of 3.8% at 30th September in 2016. We expect Eskom credit metrics to remain very weak, given the persistence of high operating costs, rising financial costs, and large planned capital expenditure. Against this reality, Numsa is firm that turnaround strategy for Eskom is simply to close the hole that are basically sinking Eskom. This is how we can fix Eskom. Numsa want to put on record that as a union we are not against transition from fossil fuel to renewable, but we are very firm that there must be a real time just transition, not the perverted definition outlined by President Cyril Ramaphosa in his SONA. Numsa is firm, though, that South Africa needs a socially owned renewable sector, that it must be introduced at a cost that the country can afford. Numsa is more than convinced that we should implement a turnaround strategy that focuses on closing all the holes we have cited above, including obvious consequences that will reverse the dropping of Eskom sales if IPPs were to be disconnected from our national grid. Such action will strengthen Eskom balance sheet. It will be able to service its debt, and its working capital. In fact, this can buy us time until 2030 with no job being lost, and the period between now and 2030 should and must be used to have an honest and frank debate about what energy mix our country needs. It is our view that there should be no holy cows. All energy resources and ownership regimes must be put on the table for debate, including nuclear. The South African public and the working class in general should reject the lie that power stations are closing because they have reached their lifespan. We should all be aware that if this government is allowed to close the power station, all coal mining and rural towns will become ghost towns in the same way the ANC government adopted gear-driving austerity measures, where the National Treasury reduced allocation at the back of belt tightening. With the closure of those power stations, those coal mines and rural towns will be ghost towns. All South African municipalities have unqualified audits and can't produce even an LED, and most of them survive at the back of Eskom power station. If Eskom is allowed to close those power stations, municipalities such as Steve Tshwete will become ghost town. It is criminal on the side of the state to have started the implementation of this bid window 1, 2, 3, 4 without any social plan. Numsa is very clear that there is no amount of manipulation of the public with the so-called unbundling, which is nothing but privatization, which will fix the liquidity crisis facing Eskom. The lie that unbundling is not privatization and that it will not lead to job losses falls flat and is collapsed by the reality that the South African public is being lied by the current board and government. Eskom workers will be retrenched after the elections. The hard reality is that they have already done the number crunching of the number of workers they want to retrench. The timing is that they will only retrench these workers after the election. Secondly, the other cheap route, which has been carefully worked out, which is a form of retrenchment, which they want to embark upon without any noise, is to quietly offer workers who are closer to retirement voluntary separation packages. Numsa wants to be on record that we regard this retrenchment and we reject it. We regard this as retrenchment, which we reject with contempt it deserves. In fact, we regard it as discrimination on the basis of on the basis of age. If Eskom want to reduce cost and strengthen its balance sheet, they would have to first sort out their mess, which we have unpacked here. As Numsa were left with no option but to engage all unions in Eskom and all progressive federations in South Africa, such as SAFTU, COSATU, with whom we must embark on a rolling mass action in defense of Eskom. The fight we are fighting at Eskom is not the fight for Eskom, but all workers across various sectors of the economy, including public sector workers who are next. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade, for that statement. Before I go to questions, I'd like to just take journalists to page 7. There's just a line I want to clarify in the statement. Page 7, number 3, bullet point number 3, where we talk about Numsa. I just need to qualify that sentence. We say the early warnings of such a reckless decision were very evident and glaring as far back as 2015. Then the next line, this is what we must correct here. Of the 8.2 billion generated in revenue through Numsa tariff increases, 6.5 billion went to the IPPs. I just wanted to correct that. Thank you. So, is there anyone from the media who would like to have a question? I think we'll do 2 rounds, depending. But for now, let's just do 1 round, and then we'll take it from there. Samkelo from ENCA. We'll take questions, and then we'll answer at the end. And you're next, no? All right, Samkelo.
It seems as if you and David Sifunzi there at the 6th Street have been comparing notes when it comes to Eskom. We might sing the same language. How far are you willing to go with regards to Eskom and this unity that you're calling for workers between yourselves and COSATU units, mainly NUM and your federation COSATU? How far are you willing to go and have those engagements of having a shutdown between the 2 federations and the 2 main unions, that Eskom, NUM and Numsa? How far are those engagements, and we agreed on a date, and what update is with regards to that?
Okay, thank you. Yes, Jacaranda?
You asked that, but also, I don't know if you're aware, but the State Capital Commission is starting to unpack what's been happening at Eskom. I just want to know if you will be handing over anything to them, and if you'll be watching what comes out of their very closely.
Okay.
Well, I think we will be watching very closely what comes out in the State Capture Commission. We obviously remaining very curious. I mean, the current leadership of government that runs Eskom, one of the things that they have been consistently doing has been to present themselves as basically as people who are dealing with the legacy of the previous leadership that occupied government. They are dealing with state capture and everything else. But nobody seemed to be telling us what happened to those mines that would have been owned by the Guptas. Have they been captured back into the hands of the state? Who owns them now? And if, for instance, we are saying we have got a shortage of coal and everything else, where are those mines that were captured by the Guptas? Are they back? So yes, we are watching as to what has happened to those mines. And I think as the media, you must assist us to check who own those mines today. Guptas are not around. Who is now occupying and controlling those mines that were owned by the Guptas? 2, I think the question you're raising is a very important question of unity of workers. I think we closed the year in 2018 with a joint march between Numsa and NUM. For us, this was a groundbreaking kind of standing together, knowing the history of where we come from. And if anything else, the NEC yesterday would have resolved that we must maintain that. We must put differences aside. Eskom is everything to all South Africans, and we must defend it with everything that we have. And we think at the center of that is the unity of Numsa NUM, and that both SAFTU and COSATU would think that they should put their prejudice aside and whatever challenges we had in the past, and we must mobilize the working class to unite them to defend Eskom. Because if you're listening to what we're saying of a tricky situation that confronts us, this government says it is not privatizing. But we just have shown you the graph that between 8 to 10 power stations are targeted for closure. We know about 3 are already been like mothballed. And how is privatization being done? So this government does not need to consult us on privatization. Their strategy to privatize Eskom is a very simple strategy. They simply make sure that they mothball a power station and they replace that power station by an IPP, which is the private sector, and that's the form of privatization. By the time we will wake up in 2021, 22, there will be no Eskom, it will be privatized. Of course, the whole question of unbundling that they are championing is, I mean, that's basically a prescription of IMF and World Bank. You first unbundle, and I mean, it's so glaring the lies that we're being told that, listen, you need to unbundle because you need transparency, you need to deal with the Eskom being a monopoly. But we're saying Eskom at NERSA, when they gave increases, they evaluate cost licenses, the cost centers are available at Eskom. So there's no basis for doing this unbundling except to forge ahead with what is continuing, which is to privatize Eskom. As we're sitting here, they are privatizing Eskom because when they decommission those power stations, they get replaced into the grid by the IPPs, which is the private sector.
Anyone else? Okay. Guys, thank you very much for coming. We appreciate your time. Anybody wants one-on-ones, please let me know. And yeah, that's it. Anything you want to add?
One,
No, it's a one-on-one. Now in 5 minutes.
Oh, okay. All right. All right then. Thank you very much for coming. Oh, are you going to take it live? What okay. You're going to do a live thing?
Can I join my co-board?
Comrade, let me give you a hard copy. I see you didn't have a hard copy there in front of you.
Thank you. Thanks, Compass.
Sure. You also need a hard copy, right?
You want to do it here or outside?
Sorry. Comrade in serious there at the back.
Okay.
How's it, comrade?
No, look, you would know that we were together with them in the march last year. But you know, it's a very difficult one because we also open the scope. So sometimes when their members come to us, you know, like members, they move sometimes from AMCO to us, from them. So it's a relationship we're managing, but they're not doing bad. I mean, Spunzi is very firm. He's confident. As to whether he can carry the union through with that tone, I'm not sure.
But it's his last term. You didn't hear him. Don't you get 2 terms?
No, if you're elected, you can. Uy, baby. Siyamleqa nje. Nabo? Yeah, no, Asiga Tadi initiative, but that's our view that we should meet.
On what? On this
On
issue?
Eskom, yeah? No, on Eskom.
Okay. And those talks of Uguti, one federation again,
Nah. Well, I think the best way of doing that is to take campaigns. That's what will take you there.
But just to Ivan Jim, GS of Numsa, who said Gwede is crying at the wrong funeral.
Did I say
I
that?
was actually I was
What
listening
did
to
you
your
say about
fight
Gwede
yesterday.
again? You said?
Said Gwede is crying at the wrong funeral.